Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Urban Art Space Artist Talk with the Lord Denney's Players. I am your host today, Dr. Sarah Neville. I'm an assistant professor in the English department here at Ohio State. And I'm also the founder and creative director of the Lord Denney's Players, which is the theater company of the Department of English. And we often call that just LDP. We've named LDP after the English department's building, Denney Hall. I started LDP when I arrived at OSU in the fall of 2014, and since then we have put on 7 productions, 5 theater performances, and because of COVID, we haven't been able to perform on stage for the past 2 years or 18 months or so. And so instead we have made 2 films. The film we've come to talk to you about today is our first nonfiction documentary film, Looking for Hamlet, 1603, which explores the controversial early history of what is arguably Shakespeare's most well-known play. Joining me here today are 5 of the producers, actors, and technical wizards that helped to make this film possible. They all devoted hundreds upon hundreds of hours to rehearsing and to researching, to writing, and to editing this film last fall semester in 2020. And I think that they do OSU and especially the College of Arts and Sciences really proud. And I'd like to introduce them now to you. And y'all can just wave or make a little bit of a sound so that you can be seen when I introduce you. So first we have Liz Hardy. Liz, do you want to say hi?
Hi.
Liz is a senior in English and speech and hearing science, ready to graduate this spring semester coming up. Jenny Morrison. Jenny, do you want to say hi?
Hey, folks.
Jenny Morrison is also going to graduate this spring with a BA in theater and English. Lior, do you want to say hello?
Hello.
Lior Livshits is going to be this spring a BA in economics. And Nicole, can you?
Hi, everyone.
Nicole Neifert is going to graduate this spring with a Bachelor of Science degree in Neuroscience. And Scott, can you unmute for a second?
Hello, hello.
Scott Sprague is an electronic media producer for the College of Arts and Sciences Technology Services, otherwise known to us as ASC Tech. And ASC Tech has been instrumental to those of us in the college since COVID began, particularly by helping faculty and students shift their work, whether teaching or research-based, to a remote environment. So I'm going to be directing some questions to various members of our talk today, though any of the 5 of you are welcome to jump in at any time if you have something that you would like to say. But I'd like to start with Liz and Jenny, because the 2 of you were taking the course that I taught last fall, which was an upper level English course, a special topics in Shakespeare course that served as the hub for this project. And I was wondering if you might go back to over a year from now and tell me what you thought about Hamlet, the play, or the cultural institution of Hamlet before you took the course, and maybe a little bit about how working on this project changed what you thought about it.
Well, I think the most important assumption that I had was that Hamlet was one text. I had not heard that there were multiple editions of any of Shakespeare's plays. That wasn't a concept I was familiar with until sophomore year of college, I believe.
I think for me, yeah, I had known that there was this bad quarto of Hamlet, but I didn't realize quite how significant the changes were between the two editions and how that could like affect the play as a whole. So I think the class was really eye-opening in that aspect.
And so could you talk about some of the challenges that we faced during the production? Because it was an unusual kind of class, right? A lot of us, I had never made a documentary film before, so I had no real sense of what I was doing. I think I described in class as like I had thrown an entire class of 24 students out of an airplane and I was knitting the parachute for us all on the way down. But we landed the parachute at some point. But could you talk a little bit about some of the experience in trying to make this thing?
Yeah. Go ahead, Liz.
You got it.
No. So I think Zoom is both a blessing and a curse, right? It's a little, it was jarring to have to be collaborating so much with people via Zoom, and like when you add on the layers of like people not necessarily being able to have their video on, or like internet difficulties, I think that got like a little complicated. But then it was also this wonderful gift, especially in the context of like interviewing scholars. Whereas previously I would have been like, well, I guess we got to fly them to Ohio. It made it so much easier to communicate across state lines.
Yeah, and sometimes internationally, right? Because one of our scholars, Laurie Johnson, was in Australia, and that was a challenge. Liz, were you interviewing Laurie Johnson, or was it?
No, I had Dr. Lesser.
You were interviewing, okay, so you were interviewing someone in Philadelphia, but even so, we had these scholars from all over the place. And I do know that the group who was interviewing Dr. Johnson, one of the major challenges was figuring out the time zone difference, because I think where he was is like 13 hours away in the future, which was difficult, but it was made even more complicated by the fact that I think the province that he was in didn't have a time change, whereas every other one did. So we also experienced a number of global challenges to the project. Liz, I think you wanted to also answer that question.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the more technical aspects of like actually making a documentary film. So I know something that like I struggled with was combing through all of this footage and having to pick out like, okay, specifically in this video at minute 59, second 51, we want to start a clip here and insert that into our film. So it was just a lot of this like groundwork of just looking through the footage and trying to figure out which pieces would work well and which pieces would actually make sense to an audience that may not have the background knowledge that we had from the class.
So did that change the way that you thought about filmmaking or film footage?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I had never made like a documentary film or worked on anything like this before. So I think I just didn't realize the amount of like precision that it takes to get a very specific cut, you know, so you don't cut off a word from an actor or have an extra word at the end. It's this very precise timing and also like stitching the scenes together to make it cohesive.
So both of you are also English majors, graduating with an English major this spring. How does this relate to how does making a movie relate to the other work that you do as an English major? Like in comparison to, I don't know, writing an essay.
Yeah, I mean, it's just another form of communication, right? And I'm like an English and theater major, so it's like doubly helpful, I think. But I think the difference, well, okay, there are many, many differences between a film and an essay, right? But like the film gives you this wonderful like visual medium to communicate ideas, and it can also be a little more like colloquial. I actually, like if someone was like, Jenny, right now, choose between making a documentary and making an essay, I would probably pick the documentary every time.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because Liz, you did exactly that. So we produced this film in the fall of 2020, and then in the spring of 21 semester, you did an independent study using some of this extra film footage because we had so much. We had hours, hundreds of hours of film footage, because we had all of the film footage from our Zoom classes, all of the footage from our interviews with multiple scholars, and then all of our rehearsal footage to comb through. So there was a lot of stuff we didn't say that we could have said. And you used some of that extra footage to make a film specifically about Ophelia. Do you want to just explain what your argument of that film was?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Dr. Neville was talking about, in looking for Hamlet, we didn't really get a chance to focus on Ophelia, I think, as much as we would have liked. So my film is kind of a companion piece to looking for Hamlet. It's about 20, 30 minutes long. And it really focuses on the difference in agency that Ophelia has. So some scholars argue that in Q1 Hamlet, Ophelia has the potential to be more outspoken or have more agency. For example, in Q1, there's a scene with her with a lute. So some scholars have argued that that lute helps her command the stage a little bit more and kind of draw the attention to her. Whereas in the Q2 and F version, that lute isn't present. So that kind of, in a way, limits the actor in how much she can do to command the attention of the other characters on stage.
Yeah, it's an excellent, I think we've dropped the link to that project, which is also on YouTube, into our chat so that our viewers who have seen Looking for Hamlet can also go look for Ophelia. I think Liz did a great job in finding her, who is so often lost in her watery grave. So I'd like to move now to talk to Lior and Nicole, who joined the production of the film. You weren't in the class itself, but you joined the production of the film. And part of the reason that you did that is that you knew about LDP, having been in LDP productions before. And I would like to ask you about what changed for you as an actor in moving from the stage to the screen, which is a really different feeling, I think. And Nicole, I'm going to ask you to start because you had a little bit of experience because you were in our previous film production, which was much a Zoom about nothing, which is how we converted in March of 2020, a almost finished live production that was just ready to mount upon the boards when President Drake had to shut down the campus because of COVID, and we moved that into a production on Zoom. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that changed your acting style. And then Lior, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I was in Romeo and Juliet my freshman year, and then my sophomore year was when we did Much Ado. And I'd say there were two big things that I noticed, like for me personally, when we made the switch. And the first one that stood out to me the most when we first made the switch was that when we had been rehearsing in person in our space, we relied a lot upon at least I relied a lot upon just the physical interactions between the different characters. Like I remember there's this one scene, and Jenny was actually there, and it's when Hero is getting married and then Claudius starts yelling at her and it's terrible. And something that I hadn't realized how much I kind of used was just all of these women that Hero was friends with, just being by her and supporting her and trying to protect her. And it was just a very just having people's arms on my shoulders and stuff. It was just a very kind of, I don't know, it was a supportive environment. And all of a sudden I was sitting in my basement in front of my computer and everybody was a tiny little box. And I had a little bit of difficulty finding that strength at first, or feeling that same connection to my other actors. Claudio was also a lot less scary when he was this small on my screen. So that was a big difference. And then the other difference for me that I noticed a lot that I liked was that I'm really bad at projecting and being loud on stage. And in Zoom, that's less of an issue because you can just, it's easier to be picked up by the microphone. So those were my big things.
That's true. I don't think we ever needed to tell you to project with Hamlet, whereas we always had to tell you to project
Yeah.
in a physical space. That's great. Lior, how did you change?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that Nicole had said translates well into what I was going to say, but I had the same where I joined LDP my freshman year. I was in Romeo and Juliet, and then unfortunately did not have the opportunity to be in Much Ado. But when I moved into Hamlet, the auditions were, and in my experience, the auditions were much different than the performance. I had practiced this monologue with Iago for like a long time, and I was in this physical space with Iago. I'd moved, I'd like, you know, physicalized him in my body. So when it got up to the auditions, I was able to manipulate the camera, even though it's stationary, and manipulate it in such a way where I'd be able to physicalize the same thing, just in a different way. But with Hamlet, because all of the rehearsals were done in my chair on a desk with the camera right up here, you know, my physical space was now limited to what essentially is this box. And so all I can't, you know, stand up and do what I need to do, because then I'll be crouching like this, or, you know, the only thing I can do is use my head and use my eyes and all that. And that's really difficult. And I will not say that it was really, really difficult. And I think when the other thing with audio, at least, that Nicole had mentioned, she has the problem projecting. I had to be mindful, at least, with being really loud, because when you're really loud on Zoom, if another person starts talking, it does this like weird overlap thing. And so, you know, if I'm really loud and I'm talking over my mother, she gets drowned out, and at least if she's like cutting me off or trying to say something. And so I have to, you know, be wary of that. And it's not even the same way with a traditional acting for the camera, because again, for acting for the camera, you do have this still physical space that you're allowed to fill up. There's also different frames. There's a wide frame, a short frame, and a close-up. So there's all these different things that you could do with acting for the camera that's not that I tried to utilize as much as I could. But again, with just this limited box, mostly what I did is just the hands and a close-up of the head, or backing away a little bit. But, you know, yeah.
It's a huge challenge, because this is a film that we made because we had Zoom available to us. So it was a tool that we knew how to use. We knew how to gain recording, but we can't manipulate a Zoom camera particularly well. And some of the tools, we had experimented with a couple of tools in our previous film, trying to use like Snapchat filters and things like that, which I think worked out well in their experiments, but they weren't particularly sustainable. And so we lost some of the things, or we never had some of the things that make a film, right? The ability, as Lior said, to change the way a camera moves. So a camera can look at the same actor from a different angle, or from a close-up. We really only have close-ups in this environment, and it could be quite a challenge, especially for actors who had scene partners. So I was wondering, especially because both playing, you know, Ophelia and playing Hamlet, even though you were both paired with, because Lior, you are the Q1 Hamlet, and Nicole, you are the Q2 Ophelia. So you were paired with different scene partners. Could you talk about that energy that you sort of gained or lost in working with a scene partner over Zoom? You've touched a little bit on this already, Nicole, but I think you probably both have more things to say.
Nicole, would you like to go first, or does it not matter?
I went first last time. You can go ahead.
Okay. So I actually, with Josie, we had a Shakespeare class with Kevin, and
that's Kevin McClatchy of the
Kevin
theater
McClatchy,
department.
yeah. I had a Shakespeare class with Kevin McClatchy, and we, at the end of the class, or either before the class, would always do this scene in person. But even then, we weren't off book. We didn't have all this stuff. So a lot of it was just trying to utilize Shakespeare's words and the text rather than act it, because we knew that whatever was going to be physicalized between us would not translate through the thing. Even though I'd said that, when I worked on Iago, it would have. The thing with, at least with this, was in rehearsals, or even right now, if you're looking at it, when you're speaking to someone, you can always see what you're doing. You can even always see your face, and it's distracting. Because if I'm speaking and I'm trying to emotionally connect with someone, then if I see myself, or just a little sliver of what I'm doing, it takes me out of it, at least every now and then. And then on top of that, if I'm in my room, I know my room very well. I know where everything is, and everything's like in my head. So I have to imagine the space where I would be with my scene partner that is not my room. And then I also don't see their space. So I'd have to then put myself in a different space, and I'd have to put my scene partner in a different place, which is very hard to do. And keeping in mind that, I'm also getting distracted by the movement and all that. And it helped a bit when it was just one person on one screen. But even then, it would be they'd be distracted because of what's going on in their room or their house, or I'd be distracted of all that. And it's just basically a lot of the emotional energy was lost through Zoom.
I think that's really interesting, because we had that one moment where we had that revelation where we could just put the scene with the queen in candlelight, where we could at least, we couldn't do a lot with that. And we couldn't make, one of the other challenges was in getting the same prop or the same idea to signify in two very distinct environments. But we did figure out at one point that you could get a candle and the queen could get a candle. And in doing that, it cast shadows on both of your faces and muted the light behind. So we had this marvelously spooky Halloweeny effect. And in directing that, I remember that it seemed to change the energy of that rehearsal so effectively that we ended up using, I think, the first or second take that we tried that.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it was I didn't use a candle because I didn't have one, but I did use a light up against the wall. We were experimenting with how the light refracted off of my wall, that it would just go just the right amount of light around my face. That would be like the same candle that she'd have. And
so we had some fun experiments there. Nicole, do you want to pick up where Lior left off?
Yeah, so for me, my Hamlet was played by Devin, and she was somebody that I had done I'd done both of my previous LDP plays with her. And so she was Beatrice when I was Hero, she was Lady Capulet when I was Lady Montague. So we had worked together and we knew each other pretty well. We knew how each other acted, and we just, I don't know, we worked together really well. And so I feel like if we hadn't been so comfortable with each other, that our performances in Hamlet may not have been, they definitely would have been more difficult. Probably would have been worse. But we just luckily had that background between the two of us. And it was also challenging, but also really fun to kind of experiment and just see kind of how Lior was talking about, just like with how close you were to the camera, because Devin especially, because in the scene we did, it's when Hamlet is being very aggressive, it's the get thee to a nunnery part. And so Devin would be very good at like taking steps towards the camera, and like I would be like flinching back or like coming back at her if I was feeling aggressive that day. But yeah, it was a very different dynamic, but because I feel like we had in-person experience to get to know each other and how we work together, it was a lot better and more comfortable. And it was more like just practicing a scene on Zoom with a friend than just, I don't know, something more scary. So yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, one of the things that enabled us to be successful was the fact that much of the company had a history with each other, a physical shared space, material history with each other that spanned a couple of years, which meant that moving on to Zoom was adapting a kind of existing relationship rather than trying to establish one from scratch, right? And I think that helped us all a fair bit, because I knew what to expect of many of the actors, and they knew what to expect from much of the experience, and we were just shifting mediums. But Liz, I think because you were also in the production, but I'm not sure, have you ever shared space with your scene partner? Had you ever met Anthony? So you were, because you were Ronaldo or Montano.
Montana, yep.
Montano to Anthony's Carambus, and you have never met him. He is an assistant professor in the English department and has been in every single Lord Denney's Players show. Wherever we need an older gentleman figure, Anthony is there, and exquisitely there. So what was that like, having to act against a person who's literally just a box to you?
Yeah, I mean, so it was definitely nerve-wracking. I had never had the opportunity to be in an LDP production before, so Hamlet was my first one. So I was already nervous, and then working with an actor that I had no, rapport with, I had no like personal connection with, was also nerve-wracking, and then add on the added layer of Zoom. It was just a lot. So I was very nervous, but I think Anthony just has such a presence about him. Like if you watch the film, he's just so good. So he made it a lot easier to kind of bounce back and forth. And I think after like the first rehearsal, I felt a lot more comfortable. And even though it was hard, just seeing like his shoulder on up, it's hard to read body language and really build off of your scene partner's body language. Just having that close of the face with like Anthony's personality really helped me feel more at ease. And as we rehearsed more, I think we really fell into kind of a good groove.
Yeah, especially challenging because it's a comedic or a funnier scene, right? There's not a ton of funny scenes that we rehearsed in Hamlet with Hamlet and Ophelia, but you definitely got some silliness. I think the bulk of the silly kind of occurs with Carambus, and then you have to respond, and because your response within a comedic scene, your scene partner does something funny, and the thing that helps sell the funniness is you, right? So that back and forth can be a real challenge. Jenny, you were in the production, and you actually got to be a human being in space with actors, but because we were still in socially distanced outdoor full mode, we needed to be extremely careful and have permission to be on campus outdoors to shoot the one scene that you were in. Could you describe that? I thought that experience was so bizarre.
Yeah, it was so we had been like, oh right, the wind will be there, but we were on, if you're familiar with that little curvy wall by the Wexner,
The
um
Whispering Wall.
yeah, the Whispering Wall. We were like on and near that wall. And there are so many sounds that happen over there. There were like high street sounds, various motorcycles, lots of booming and music, which I don't think we really anticipated. And it was so interesting and kind of like bittersweet because I was like personally friends with the majority of the people in the scene. So it was like lovely to see everyone again, but like so weird to be distanced from them. And we were the guards. It was right at the beginning. So we had our masks, but we also had on coats and hats. And I think maybe someone had a scarf, but like we were so covered that it was really like we were all anonymous, you know? But I do think like it was nighttime. It looks pretty creepy over there. I think it ended up working. It was just such a weird, um, weird way to do things.
Well, it was almost the opposite of so what Lior was describing, right, of having to be just ahead in a box and being very restricted in how you can emote and the kinds of things that you can do on Zoom. When we had to move to a remote, socially distanced, masked film moment where we're shooting actual bodies and we used a camera for that, it was like you had to act almost pantomime in order to be, lo, there is the ghost. There was a lot of extra physicality that had we had our normal stage experience, you certainly would not have needed to do, because your face could have done the work, but your face was just a pair of eyes. So your body had to do a whole lot and your voice had to do a whole lot. And then the sounds coming from High Street were so excessive. And I think, I can't remember, Scott, if you had to like edit out some of that noise, some of that excess honking and barking and booming
Yeah,
noise.
there was quite a bit of background noise, but that was, just sort of par for the course with this project. Working on Zoom turned everything upside down, and what was a little background noise, it's nothing that we couldn't handle.
Yeah, it gave us a lot. It gave us a lot to work with. Lior, I have another question for you, because you were playing the Q1 version of Hamlet, who's a character that's markedly different from the known figure of Hamlet, the figure that we associate with the play. So he's younger, for one thing, than that other Hamlet, the traditional Hamlet. He's much more active and impulsive. He doesn't we have a stereotype of Hamlet correctly, but it's a stereotype from the Q2 version where he's this brooding emo guy, right? As one of the interviewees says. But your Hamlet, the Hamlet of Q1, he's not that guy. He's a different kind of guy. And so I'm wondering how you felt about that experience, because you must have had kind of a journey between when you like auditioned for Hamlet and you thought you knew what you were doing, and then the rug gets pulled out from under you a little bit. So how did that go?
Yeah, I was familiar with how Shakespeare had different iterations of his texts, plays, but I was not aware of how drastic Q1 from Q2 / the first folio versions were. And like you said, I was auditioning. I chose Iago because I felt that a lot of the characteristics with Iago at least mirrored just a little bit of some of the characteristics of Q2 of Hamlet. And then I learned that I was going to be doing Q1. And when you first told me, I was like, okay, so it's Q1 Hamlet. It's just going to be a little edited. Okay, whatever. And then we started talking about, this Hamlet is not the same. And one of the main things I remember was I was trying to rationalize the soliloquy of the oh god,
The big one.
yeah, the big one. It's been a year and I just forget the first line.
To be or not to
yeah,
be. Yeah.
yeah, to be or not to be. I was thinking of O22. Oh, that is tutu solid flesh would melt. Anyway, the to be or not to be one, and I just tried to think of how I would be, and the 18-year-old me would think of like committing suicide, and like how that would be in my or contemplating suicide, I should say. And I think that what I decided was the 18-year-old Hamlet, since he was so impulsive and didn't really experience life, just this like 18-year-old kid who has this like anxiety, like looming cloud of anxiety, doesn't know how to deal with it. And that would be the rationale behind him for thinking of or contemplating suicide, or and being so upset with his, mother, dating his uncle. And I mean, sorry, I would be upset if my mother was also dating my uncle, or sleeping with my uncle. But I just feel like a lot of these like stuff that was happening to Hamlet, I tried to rationalize it as an 18-year-old, not rationalize it as someone who the quarto 2 version of Hamlet would. And it was, yeah, that was the main thing that I noticed.
Did you feel, I'm curious about this because I think usually for an actor, playing Hamlet is something you don't get to do until you're in your 30s or in your even 40s. Or if you're Ian McKellen, who's performing Hamlet right now at the age of like, 83 or something in London, you get to keep playing Hamlet forever. But it's certainly not something that's associated with a younger actor. Did you ever have to explain to anybody who was surprised like that you're playing Hamlet, or explain that it was a different kind of Hamlet that they might know?
I don't think I've ever told anyone that this would be the 18-year-old Hamlet that I'd be portraying, mainly because I probably forgot. And that when they're like, "Oh, you're playing Hamlet," I'd be like, yeah, I'm playing Hamlet. No big deal, But yeah, I don't think they ever asked. Yeah, I never really got any comments about. That's interesting. I've thinking about that the Hamlet is actually played by older men and not younger guys. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to you graduate up to Hamlet quite frequently in productions. So I'm going to turn now, and then I'm going to open it up to some questions. So if any of our viewers have questions they'd like to ask any of our guests, please feel free to throw that up in the Q&A. But I'd like to turn to Scott now to ask about how ASC Tech weathered the pandemic. How did a film like Looking for Hamlet fit in with the kinds of work that ASC Tech normally does for the college?
Well, it it fit in that it's a film, but beyond that, the way that we produced this because of COVID, it was anything but normal. It was quite a learning experience for me, really. I'm used to going out and doing the filming myself, and with that, I have my own organizational structure. The way I bring things back and store them and whatnot. That all was just, forget about it. I had umpteen Zoom recordings, and you all were so amazing helping to keep organized and keeping me on point. I don't know anything about Shakespeare, let alone Hamlet. And so through this process, not only was it a learning, technical learning experience, but I really learned a lot about Hamlet, which I really enjoyed quite a bit. Having all of these Zoom recordings, which came in, in different formats. Not everybody has the same type of phone or laptop or operating system, and the way everything was recorded was very different. And so to make that all sort of match up, different frame rates, different audio levels and whatnot, was its own unique and new challenge. Working remotely Typically, when I'm editing with somebody, they're right next to me, and so we can, work quickly, and that wasn't the case. And then on top of that, I live out in the country in a rural location, and I don't have a great internet connection there. So any revisions that I made, I would have to drive an hour to campus with permission, upload that, drive back home, and then get changes, work on the changes, and then a couple days later, repeat. So it was very much a learning experience. I think all of ASC Tech through COVID experienced, sort of similar growing pains, if you will, because it was suddenly our responsibility to make all of these classes appear online, make this film appear online. We got through it really well. And personally, I really enjoyed working on this project and the previous one as well. It was great fun seeing the final product.
Yeah, I think this is such a great point. Like the scale of what ASC managed to accomplish in moving all of these classes online with COVID was humongous, and the sort of technical heft that we needed to do in order to record classes, let alone record a whole bunch of other things like all of these rehearsals, and then find a way to make those files shareable, required just a bunch of other steps, right? I'm trying to think about how many files you had to download and then upload into Buckeye Box, which is what we were using then, right? It was hundreds of files.
Oh, at least. And, on top of it were files that you all used for notes. So there was a lot of behind the scenes collaboration that you guys did that, obviously didn't make it into the film. But, for every minute that was in the film, there were probably 100 minutes of footage that you guys had to go through and organize. And I have to say that the script that you all sent me, at first I was like, holy cow, look at this. But then as I got into it, it's like, wow, this is very organized. It's interesting. All of the actors and the players and even the interviewees, everyone was very enthusiastic, and it added to what could have been sort of a boring, it's over Zoom and a little postage stamp video. I think it came together as a really engaging piece. It's something I'm proud to have worked on.
Well, we are all very proud to have worked on it too. I think, and glad that so many folks have been interested in it. It's had over 1,000 views on YouTube and has been screening 3 times a day on campus in the Hopkins Hall Gallery of the Urban Art Space as for the past 2 weeks. So it's still there. You can go and see yourself or see us in the Urban Art Space Gallery of Hopkins Hall. I think it's 11, 12:45, and 2:30 are the daily screenings through October the 8th. It's also available on the online gallery of the Urban Art Space, and maybe Clara can put a link to that in the chat if she can find it. So yeah, I think this is such a great point. We had for every minute that we had of film footage within the film itself, there was 100 minutes, give or take, of footage that didn't make it in. And editing that down and deciding what it was that we were going to use was a challenge. We were in the weird position of writing the screenplay for our film as we were filming it. And so that meant that we could usually, when Lord Denney's players put on a production and we do coursework alongside of it, that coursework is able to the production is able to end the coursework. We put on the play in the same semester that we do that coursework. And so we have that kind of synchronicity. Film is an asynchronous medium. And so that meant that we had to finish this object that we made, this textual object that we made after the class had ended. So it's been really great that we have had an opportunity to come back together and share it now after the fact. So we have some questions in the Q&A. The first one I think is directed to the actors. Has putting yourself in the mind of your character caused a shift in your mindset for certain aspects of your life? I think this is a question inspired a little bit by Lior, but also might be appropriate for Ophelia as well. So to be more clear, after playing a character, do you find yourself showing attitudes or perspectives that align with your character? Has being Ophelia or Hamlet, or is it Marcellus, Jenny, that you played? Has Marcellus changed you?
Yes, deeply. I spend every moment of my life searching for ghosts, actually. Actually, that's not even a lie, but that was before Marcellus, so.
Ophelia or Hamlet?
Yeah, I think it was, as I was saying, I don't think Hamlet influenced me or his thoughts or anything like that. I think it was more of what I took from my own personal experience or from my friends' personal experiences and applied it to the 18-year-old Hamlet, for example. I don't know if the other actor or the other characters I've played have ever done. I mean, I'm trying to think if Romeo had. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm a catch with all the girls, but I can't really say much for anything else. No, I'll have to think about that one some more. So Nicole, if you want to give it a shot.
Yeah, I would have to say I do agree with Lior a little bit about how like it is a lot of like pouring myself into the character, and less so maybe letting them influence me. But I mean, especially like when I'm in the thick of like the rehearsal process or things like that, like I do feel influenced by my character. Like I remember, this isn't here, but I remember when I was like Hero, sometimes like she would have a particularly distressful experience and I would be a little rattled from that even after rehearsals sometimes. But something from Hamlet this time around was that our Ophelia, at least like the one that I did, we kind of made her a little more, I don't know, a little more fiery than like my stereotypical image of Ophelia usually is. Like instead of like just being all like cryy and stuff, that's not a word, like just being like all heartbroken and stuff, like she was also kind of just fighting back, like she was angry instead of just being sad, which is something that I hadn't really, I don't know, that's not how I would normally respond to a situation. I'm definitely more the kind of person who would just start crying. But I don't know, I feel like doing that kind of it was fun kind of having the permission to get angry and letting myself kind of feel that, I don't know, to just seed like that. So I don't know if that necessarily means I get more angry in everyday life, because it doesn't, but I feel like it did make me a little more comfortable with like exploring those types of emotions, if that makes any sense. So
it's an interesting question, because one of the things that's my job as a director is to try to figure out what is the right tone for the actors to take in this scene, given the combination of the actors and their energy. And so sometimes that means fully experimenting. We know that the scene is often played with a very sad and weepy Ophelia. We know that the scene between Hamlet and Ophelia is often played with Hamlet being quite violent or cruel to Ophelia in a very physical kind of way. Zoom prevents us from being physical with each other, literally, right? There is a distance, and it starts to look quite silly when a character tries to put their hand on another character. We can only do these occasional violent movements, but even so, it looks quite false, right? It breaks the illusion. So we have to come up with alternatives. And this leads me to another question. Do you think the virtual medium impacted the spirit of the story by putting more focus on the actors? And I think definitely it does. It's much more difficult to create ambiance on Zoom. The setting is obviously almost impossible to convey because we are all in different backgrounds. We can put ourselves against blank walls. We often would try to do that with the actors so that we didn't have distracting stuff like dogs behind us. But even so, you really want to focus on the faces of the people that are doing the acting, because that at least is something that Zoom can control particularly well. So I have another question for Lior. How did the differing placement of the to be or not to be soliloquy affect your acting choices? So how did you feel differently? I think so the placement, it is placed in a slightly different place in the Q1 text versus the F text, but because we didn't rehearse the entire play at any point, that was less significant. We only just took a chunk of scenes. I think we rehearsed in total and performed, I think, about 8 scenes of the play. But we did have, the speech is categorically different, right, Lior? So how did that change affect you?
Yeah, forgive me for not remembering the quarter 1 or the quarter 2 because it happened so fast. But was it later or earlier in the monologue or the soliloquy, the to be or not to be? Do you remember?
The to be or not to be comes right early on in the soliloquy.
For the quarter 1.
It comes around the same. It comes a little bit earlier in the play. Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, I think it solidified again my choice to make it more of an impulsive decision, because with quarter 2, if it comes later, then I think the reason being is, you know, Hamlet's brooding over all these thoughts, and he's got all these things that are coming up and showing up, and then he says to be or not to be, and that's kind of like an answer rather than a question to everything that's that he's said before or whatever comes after, and versus this one where to be or not to be is so at least if it's earlier than significantly earlier, then it at least solidified the choice of it being more of an impulsive thing that Hamlet thinks about rather than like an actual contemplative thought.
Yeah, Liz, were you in the to be or not to be act? Do you have thoughts on this?
I was, yeah. And my group, we didn't talk too much about the placement of the soliloquy, but we did talk about the difference between the syntax of Q1 being almost more like stream of consciousness, which is really interesting. If you look at it line by line, you can pick out, you know, differences in word choice and differences in punctuation, versus in the later versions of Hamlet. A lot of scholars have argued that the soliloquy is more poetic in a way and more structured. So it almost seems like Hamlet is more rigid, for lack of a better word, whereas in Q1, you know, it's more stream of conscious, more like spiraling, again, like that 18-year-old emo kind of vibes, like not really knowing what's going on. So yeah, that's kind of what we talked about a bit in our portion of the film.
It's an interesting idea. Like the Q2 traditional Hamlet is the Hamlet who's like trying to get the right Instagram speech. Like he's been working on it for a while. And he's the influencer. It's the influencer speech. Whereas the Q1 is like the organic, just happens to go viral Hamlet. So this is the last question. And then we're going to wrap up. And it's a question about LDP. So has anyone played Shakespeare parts prior to LDP, or was LDP your first experience? How has LDP or other experiences changed your acting?
I could start off with everyone. So I was in freshman year, I was with the theater department here at OSU, and I played Antonio in 12th Night. And I think we did just a shortened version of the Q2. And I met my teacher, my acting teacher, who had taught me about all the 3 different things. And then I used utilized him to audition for Romeo and Juliet with LDP, because I knew that one of my friends had told me about it, Isaiah Johnson, had told me about LDP, and I did not get cast in any of the theater departments for second semester. Thankfully, thank God that I didn't. I would much rather have done Romeo again and again and again and again and again with LDP. It's such a great group. And then I took the next one was Much Ado About Nothing, but I got cast in Midsummer.
I think you were in Red Velvet.
Red Velvet, yeah. I was cast in Red Velvet, and then Hamlet came along, and obviously, not a lot of stuff was going on, and I was glad that Hamlet was coming up. And it was an interesting experience. And if it ever comes on stage, I'll definitely give it another shot. But I need to get back to the original question with how it changed my acting experiences. Shakespeare, I think, is the best thing for an actor to do first off. I think it's just so fundamental. It really gets you focused on the text rather than on anything else. And when you focus on the text and you try to eat at it, just because of the way that Shakespeare writes, and it's so untraditional. When you learn all these things about Shakespeare, I mean, it's really beautiful. In both just the literary sense and in the acting sense, there's so much in there that I still use a lot of the stuff that I've learned from Shakespeare analysis into my modern stuff that I do today.
Yeah, for me, I kind of thought Shakespeare was a bunch of hooey. I got to, I don't know, in high school I was like, great, every year we read something incomprehensible, and then inevitably halfway through we switch to No Fear Shakespeare, and it's fine. And then I got to college, and I was seduced into doing Shakespeare by everyone who does Shakespeare at OSU just being wonderful, lovely people.
We're
And the
pushers.
more, huh?
We're Shakespeare pushers.
Yeah, exactly. Which was no fair. And then the more that I understood the texts, the more that I was interested in it. And personally, I really love pop culture remixing, retelling stories, right? And Shakespeare, that happens so much. And it's been really cool for me to learn how to understand Shakespeare, but also how to have fun with him.
I had also had the high school Shakespeare experience, but it was very positive. I loved it a lot. And I was kind of a Hamlet fangirl in senior year of high school, but that's okay. And I remember my sister, she's several years older than me, but she had also done Shakespeare kind of just on the side in college. And I thought that was super cool. And so I remember Dr. Neville came in and did a guest lecture in one of my classes freshman year, the fall semester. And I was like, I guess I'm doing that now. And I'm so glad I did, because I hadn't really had any Shakespeare acting or just general acting experience before LDP. So basically, everything I am as an actor, I owe to LDP. So thanks, LDP. Thanks, Dr. Neville, for spreading the word. So yeah, I love the people here. I love the work we do. I love Shakespeare, and it's just been a really, really positive experience for me.
I know for me, I had done a Shakespeare role before. I was Portia in Julius Caesar, but I think the fact that LDP is situated within the English department just gives it not only the performance, but the literary aspect. So for me, as an English major, I think that also really helps me better understand the play and my character and the plot of what was going on in the show overall.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining me here today, and for those wonderful answers. I'd just like to invite all of you who are listening that LDP's next production is Shakespeare's The Comedy of Errors, which will mount in March of 2022 with productions both on campus and downtown in partnership with Mikey's Late Night Slice. So we are going to explore space. Now that we are able to be together again, we are going to perform in a fast-paced and silly environment, as well as a pizza joint. So thank you all for coming, and bon voyage.